Number 1. Chernobyl, the ghost town's legacy. You know how some decisions just spiral completely out of control, turning a bad idea into an apocalyptic nightmare. Well, hold on to your Geiger counters, because Chernobyl is the poster child for that kind of spectacular failure. On April 26, 1986, a flawed reactor design, coupled with poorly trained operators and a series of ill-conceived safety tests, led to an explosion that ripped apart Unit 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union. It wasn't just a nuclear accident, it was a catastrophic meltdown that forever altered the landscape, created a ghost city, and sent a terrifying cloud of radioactive material across Europe. Imagine a silent explosion, not with a boom, but with a horrifying release of invisible, odorless death. The graphite core of the reactor ignited, burning for days, spewing massive amounts of radioactive isotopes like iodine-131, cesium-137, and strontium-90 into the atmosphere. The immediate aftermath was chaos, firefighters bravely battling the blaze without knowing the true danger. Thousands of liquidators, soldiers, miners, and civilians sent in to clean up the mess with minimal protection, and a shocking delay in evacuation, especially for the nearby city of Pripyat. Imagine having only a few hours' notice to leave your entire life behind, knowing you can never return. The human cost was immediate and long-term. Dozens died from acute radiation sickness in the weeks and months following the disaster. Thousands more suffered from cancers, birth defects, and chronic illnesses in the years that followed. Although the exact long-term death toll is fiercely debated due to political sensitivities and difficulties in attribution, a massive exclusion zone was established, a roughly 2,600 square kilometer area around the plant, where human habitation is forbidden. Pripyat, once a thriving city, stands frozen in time, a haunting monument to the disaster, its Ferris wheel rusting, its classrooms filled with scattered textbooks. Chernobyl remains the worst nuclear power plant accident in history, a Level 7 event on the International Nuclear Event Scale (INS). It triggered a global re-evaluation of nuclear safety protocols and fueled anti-nuclear movements worldwide. It was a terrifying lesson in the immense power and the terrifying fragility of atomic energy, proving that sometimes the most destructive forces are the ones you can't even see, hear, or smell. Basically, it was a power plant that decided to go out with a bang, leaving behind an invisible, glowing scar on the planet. Number 2. Fukushima Daiichi, the triple meltdown. You know how sometimes one disaster just piles on top of another, creating a chain reaction of absolute mayhem. That's the tragic story of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan. On March 11, 2011, a massive magnitude 9.0 earthquake triggered a devastating tsunami, which then swamped the plant, leading to the unthinkable, a triple meltdown. It wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a cascading series of failures that created the second worst nuclear accident in history. Imagine the ground shaking violently. Then a colossal wave, taller than the plant's sea walls, slams into the coast. This tsunami knocked out the plant's primary power and, crucially, its backup diesel generators, which were meant to power the cooling systems, with no power to circulate water. The cores of 3 of the plant's 6 reactors rapidly began to overheat, leading to meltdowns and hydrogen explosions that blew apart the reactor buildings. Imagine watching a series of explosions rip through what was supposed to be a safe, contained power source, knowing exactly what's inside. The disaster released significant amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere and the Pacific Ocean. Hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated from a wide area around the plant, their lives uprooted, many still unable to return. The cleanup and decommissioning process is expected to take decades, costing billions, with the plant still needing constant cooling and management of contaminated water. While there were no immediate deaths attributed to acute radiation sickness, the long-term health effects are still being studied, and the psychological impact on the displaced population is immense. Fukushima Daiichi, like Chernobyl, was classified as a Level 7 INS event, It highlighted the vulnerabilities of even advanced nuclear facilities to extreme natural events and the need for robust, multi-layered safety systems. It also sparked a renewed debate about nuclear power's role in a world grappling with climate change, basically. It was a power plant that survived an earthquake, but then got a deadly splash of reality from Mother Nature, leaving behind a very hot mess. Number 3. Kyshtym disaster. The secret Soviet explosion. You know how some countries just love keeping secrets, even when those secrets involve exploding radioactive waste and contaminating entire regions. Well, the Kyshtym disaster in the Soviet Union is arguably the epitome of that Cold War-era secrecy. On September 29, 1957, a storage tank containing highly radioactive waste at the Mayak Production Association, a nuclear reprocessing plant near the town of Kyshtym in the Ural Mountains, exploded, showering a vast area with deadly radionuclides. It wasn't just an accident. It was a decades-long, deliberate cover-up of an environmental catastrophe. Imagine a loud explosion, a cloud of orange and blue smoke rising miles into the air, but no official explanation, no warning, and no evacuation for weeks. The explosion was due to a faulty cooling system in the tank, causing the waste to overheat and detonate with the force of about 7,100 tons of TNT. This released about 20 million curies of radioactivity, a significant amount, though dwarfed by Chernobyl's airborne release, primarily strontium-90 and cesium-137. The immediate area was devastated, with pine trees turning red and dying. The Soviet authorities immediately clamped down on information. The affected area, known as the East Ural Radioactive Trace, EURT, stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Villages were slowly evacuated over 2 years, often without telling residents why, simply dismantling their homes. Imagine being told to leave your farm, seeing military personnel burning crops and leveling villages, but being given no explanation for the invisible threat. The long-term health effects on the exposed population were devastating, with increased rates of cancers and chronic illnesses. Though the true extent was suppressed for decades, the Kyshtym disaster was initially classified as a Level 6 INES event, one of the worst in history. It remained a state secret for almost 30 years, only coming to light in the West through scientific papers and later. The Glasnost era. It's a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked nuclear development, combined with a totalitarian regime's obsession with secrecy, proving that sometimes the most terrifying explosions are the ones nobody talks about until it's far too late. Basically, it was a nuclear plant that decided to discreetly detonate its trash, and then hoped everyone would just forget about the glowing, poisoned landscape. Number 4. Windscale fire, Britain's nuclear burn. You know how sometimes even the most advanced nations have a whoopsie moment that turns into a full-blown crisis. That was the Windscale fire in the United Kingdom. On October 10, 1957, a graphite-moderated nuclear reactor at the Windscale Sellafield site in Cumbria, England, caught fire during a routine maintenance procedure. It wasn't a meltdown, but it was Britain's worst nuclear accident, releasing a plume of radioactive material that spread across parts of the UK and Europe. Imagine a giant, graphite oven meant to produce plutonium for nuclear weapons, suddenly getting too hot, during a process called Wigner release, where graphite can expand and store energy when irradiated, then release it as heat. Operators tried to reheat the core to safely release this stored energy, but they miscalculated, overheating the uranium fuel itself, causing it to ignite. A fire then raged inside the reactor for 3 days, spewing radioactive particles, including a significant amount of iodine-131 up its 400-foot chimney. The immediate response involved frantic efforts to extinguish the fire. First with carbon dioxide, which didn't work, and then with water, a risky move as it could have caused a steam explosion, but thankfully didn't. Imagine highly trained engineers desperately trying to put out an invisible, radioactive fire inside a gigantic, sealed concrete building. The public wasn't immediately warned, but a notorious decision was made to halt the sale of milk from nearby farms for weeks, due to radioactive contamination specifically, iodine-131 in the grass eaten by cows. The Windscale fire was later classified as a Level 5 INES event. While the long-term health impacts are debated, with some studies showing a slight increase in cancers in the affected areas. It was a significant event that led to stricter safety protocols and a re-evaluation of reactor designs. It was a sobering reminder that even in highly developed nations, the pursuit of nuclear power and weapons comes with inherent, terrifying risks. And sometimes, the most dangerous things are simply misunderstood. Basically, it was a reactor that decided to play with fire and then gave everyone downwind a free, unwanted dose of glowing milk. Number 5. 3 Mile Island, the near miss that shook a nation. You know how some close calls make you realize just how thin the line is between a minor incident and utter catastrophe? That was 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, USA. On March 28, 1979, a series of mechanical failures, compounded by baffling human errors and poor communication, led to a partial meltdown of the Unit 2 reactor. It wasn't a Chernobyl-level explosion, but it was America's most serious commercial nuclear power plant accident, nearly turning a chunk of Pennsylvania into a permanent exclusion zone. Imagine a cascade of unfortunate events. A pressure valve opens, but then sticks, allowing cooling water to escape. Operators in the control room, misinterpreting confusing instrument readings. A faulty indicator light told them the valve was closed, then manually shut off the emergency core cooling system, thinking the reactor had too much water. For hours, the reactor core was uncovered and overheating, quietly beginning to melt. Imagine watching a series of blinking lights and gauges, convinced you're fixing a problem, when you're actually making it exponentially worse. The core partially melted, releasing some radioactive gases into the atmosphere and radioactive water into the auxiliary building. While the amount of radiation released to the public was ultimately small, estimated to be about the same as a chest X-ray for those living nearby, the psychological impact was immense. Thousands were evacuated, especially pregnant women and young children. The entire nation watched in terrified suspense as experts debated whether a full meltdown and containment breach was imminent. 3 Mile Island was classified as a Level 5 INES event. It led to widespread public distrust of nuclear power, a halt in the construction of new nuclear plants in the U.S. for decades, and a massive overhaul of nuclear safety regulations, operator training, and emergency response protocols. It was a terrifying wake-up call, proving that even with robust safety systems, human fallibility and mechanical glitches can combine to bring a nation to the brink of disaster. Basically, it was a nuclear plant that decided to have a massive, very public anxiety attack, and everyone within a 20-mile radius felt it. Number 6. Goiânia accident, the scavenged radioactive source. You know how sometimes an innocent-looking object can hold a horrifying, invisible power. That's the terrifying premise of the Goiânia accident in Brazil. In September 1987, a highly radioactive teletherapy unit used for radiation treatment was left in an abandoned clinic, scavenged by scrap metal dealers, and then broken open. What followed was a truly tragic, horrifying series of events as a single. Glowing piece of cesium-137 changed hands, contaminated dozens, and left a deadly trail of sickness and death. It wasn't a power plant disaster. It was a disaster caused by pure, terrifying ignorance. Imagine a bright, glowing blue powder. That's what the scrap metal dealers found when they broke open the therapy unit. It was the highly radioactive cesium-137 chloride, glowing due to Cherenkov radiation. Fascinated, they showed it to family, friends, and neighbors. People touched it, painted it on their skin, spread it on the floor, thinking it was magic or valuable dust. One girl even rubbed it on her body, marveling at its glow in the dark. Imagine holding a piece of death in your hands, thinking it's a cool light-up toy. The contamination spread rapidly. Over 100,000 people were screened, and hundreds were found to be contaminated. 4 people died quickly from acute radiation syndrome, including the young girl who played with the powder. Others suffered horrific burns, organ damage, and long-term health issues. Houses had to be demolished, topsoil removed, and vast amounts of radioactive waste collected and stored. The sheer scale of the environmental cleanup and the personal tragedy were immense. The Goiânia accident was classified as a Level 5 INS event. It's a chilling case study in the dangers of orphaned radioactive sources and the devastating consequences when dangerous materials fall into untrained hands. It highlighted the critical need for strict control and disposal of all radioactive materials, proving that sometimes the deadliest nuclear disaster isn't a massive explosion, but a tiny, glowing powder in the wrong hands. Basically, it was a tiny radioactive disco ball that gave everyone who touched it a truly terminal glow. Number 7. SL-1 Reactor Meltdown, the military's deadly accident. You know how sometimes, even in controlled environments, things just go spectacularly wrong, often with tragic, unforeseen consequences. That was the SL-1 reactor meltdown in Idaho, USA. On January 3, 1961, a small experimental nuclear power reactor, used by the U.S. Army, experienced a steam explosion and meltdown that killed all 3 operators present. It wasn't a massive public disaster, but it was a chilling, violent, and ultimately deadly reminder of the dangers of nuclear technology, even in its early, supposedly safe, stages. Imagine 3 men performing routine maintenance, reconnecting a control rod that was part of the reactor's core. For reasons still debated, this rod was suddenly withdrawn far too quickly, far too much. This caused the reactor to go prompt critical. An uncontrolled, rapid increase in power, in milliseconds. A massive surge of heat turned the core's water into superheated steam, which then violently expanded, causing a steam explosion. Imagine a small room suddenly being consumed by an unseen, incredibly powerful explosion that rips apart steel and human bodies. The explosion killed the 3 operators instantly, one of whom was impaled to the ceiling by a control rod. Their bodies were highly radioactive, requiring extreme caution during recovery. The reactor core was severely damaged, and a significant amount of radioactive fission products were released within the containment building. The cleanup effort was extensive and dangerous, involving heavily protected personnel who had to repeatedly enter a highly radioactive environment to dismantle the remains of the reactor. The SL-1 accident was the first fatal reactor accident in U.S. history and led to significant changes in reactor design, training, and operational procedures, particularly regarding control rod mechanisms. While its public impact was limited compared to later disasters, its immediate, violent lethality to the operators served as a stark lesson in the inherent dangers of nuclear fission. Basically, it was a tiny nuclear reactor that decided to punch its operators' tickets, just to prove a point about physics. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.